going to give it a minute or two as people kind of roll in.
Oh man, it's climbing.
$76. Yep, nice. We're expecting a lot of people tonight, and I know that there is an automatic message that plays when y'all log into the webinar. So I'm just kind of buying some time for that to happen before we jump into it. Thanks for being here. Oh, cool. We can see reactions. We got a thumbs up. Ooh, everyone's throwing thumbs up. Love to see it.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like a streamer.
Xavier Williams, like I know him. Actually.
We're gonna start doing shout outs. Very cool. We got a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And we're expecting a lot more, so I will give it a couple more minutes because right now we're only at around 90 and we are expecting about 400, 450. So we'll see if all of y'all show up. But thanks again for being here. All right, we've been kind of steady around the 100 number. So I will just get us started. Thank y'all for being here. I'm Natalia Gonzalez. I work with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Angler Education Team, and I am excited to host tonight's Red Drum webinar with David and Joel from the Coastal Fisheries team. I'm going to jump right in because we've got a lot of information to cover. So no need to worry about your mics being muted or cameras being off. The webinar does that for you automatically. Throughout the webinar, you can submit questions to us, and here are the instructions for that. Thank you to those that submitted questions ahead of time. At the end of the workshop, we will directly answer some of those questions that y'all submitted. And if we don't get to it, we will try our best to add it to the resources in our follow-up email. This webinar is being recorded, and we will upload it to the YouTube channel that we've got, and potentially might be posted to the TPWD website under the fishing tab. Here is our agenda for tonight. We will have a break kind of at the midway point after Joel is done with his presentation, and then we'll continue on. I'll hand it off to David to start our intros.
How's it going, everybody? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Awesome. So my name's David Norris. I grew up in Hill Country, come from Kerrville, Texas, and have been fishing my whole life. I started out at these camps called Outdoor Texas Camp, and that's kind of how I got introduced to saltwater. And kind of the reason why I went to school at A&M Corpus Christi. A lot of the places I fished during the camp were right there, so I thought that might be a great place to go to school. But after that, I worked for the Center for Sportfish Science and Conservation at the Hart Research Institute for about 5 years, getting to do a lot of different sportfish projects, tagging sharks, tagging snapper, and then went on to work with Texas Parks and Wildlife going on 6.5 years. I worked with the Corpus Christi Bay management team, and now I'm with the habitat assessment team. But yeah, I'm Coast Guard, six-pack licensed captain, and haven't really fished tournaments recently, but looking to get back into it. But big tournament fisherman back in college, and I'm excited to share what is a passion of mine with everybody here.
Thanks, David.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Anderson. I'm a 22-year veteran of the Coastal Fisheries Division of Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'm a biologist at one of our coastal hatcheries in Palacios, the Perry R. Bass Marine Fisheries Research Station and Hatchery, where we raise red drum and also spotted sea trout and flounder. Although I'm located at a hatchery, my main focus for the agency is on research. And I've been involved in research on red drum basically my entire career, and I'm hoping to bring some of that expertise to the table tonight in talking about this pretty iconic sport fish and the state saltwater fish of Texas.
Thanks for sharing, Joel. I am a little bit newer to the agency. In November, it'll be 2 years. I am an aquatic education training specialist here in Austin. I've been working in the outdoor recreation and environmental education program planning field across both public and private sectors for the past 10 years. I went to St. Ed's, and I love teaching people about safe and ethical angling. I'm going to get into a little bit about the program that I work for. Angler Ed is funded by the Sport Fish Restoration Fund. We are a small team of 3 for the whole state. We're primarily volunteer-led, and our volunteers and staff train adults to become Angler Ed instructors. And then we support that network of 5,000 volunteer instructors by providing them guidance and resources for teaching fishing skills and aquatic education across the state. Here's a little bit about our impact so far and some pictures. I want to emphasize how important anglers are as stewards of the resource. We as anglers are stewards because for us, we know that healthy environments mean healthy fish populations, and healthy fish populations mean better fishing experiences. And we had when we have those great days of fishing, I don't know about y'all, but it definitely motivates me to protect the resource so that others can have those same experiences, and so that future generations can have those experiences as well. Another example of anglers' connection to conservation is that we're often first-line observers of ecosystem changes. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with the CCA, but how CCA began is just kind of one of those really great examples of that. If y'all don't know their history, in 1977, commercial fisheries, there was a lot of overfishing by commercial overfishing along the Texas coast, and that really impacted the red and speckled trout populations. Anglers noticed a change. They spoke up, and then only 4 years later, red drum and speckled trout were declared game fish. So pretty neat that anglers were a part of that. I mentioned that we were funded by the Sport Fish Restoration Program. This is a program that is a partnership between anglers, boaters, the fishing and boating industry, TPWD, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So I know y'all are wondering, like, how do the anglers fit into that cycle? Really, to put it simply, there's an excise tax on certain equipment, and then revenue from that is split up across states based on a formula that includes total land and water mass, as well as the number of licensed anglers in the state. So when y'all buy a license, you directly support those TPWD projects that focus on creating and maintaining incredible sport fishing opportunities in Texas. The Angler Ed program and TPWD Fish Hatcheries are just 2 programs that are supported by this fund. We have 5 freshwater hatcheries and 3 coastal hatcheries in Texas that produce and stock over 40 million fish annually. So a lot of fish. Here is the Angler Ed region map and some of our staff. Like I said, we got 3 for the whole state. I'm there in green. We are on social media. You can find us there. And I just wanted to thank y'all again for joining us, and thank y'all for being anglers as well. We hope that the information that we shared tonight helps you on the water, and we're grateful to be a part of your conservation journey. I'll hand it off to Joel to talk about the star of the show tonight, the red drum.
Thanks, Natalia. Hopefully everybody can see that all right. So given that everyone here signed up for a webinar about redfish, this title is a little dramatic on my part. I think we can all assume that everyone knows generally what a redfish is. So this presentation is going to be more about the simple biology of this fish. And I'll finish up talking a little bit about red drum stock enhancement as well. So I wanted to start out by looking at the taxonomy of a redfish. A man named Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s came up with our biological classification system, which is just a way to place individual species into smaller and smaller groups of closely related species: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, that sort of thing. Red drum or redfish are in the animal kingdom and the phylum Chordata. And that phylum Chordata, that's just due to the presence of a spinal cord and vertebrae. All the chordates have that. Actinopterygii is the class of bony fish that include red drum. These fish have ray fins, which separates them from species like sharks that don't have ray fins. Perciformes is the largest order of bony fish and have a perch-like body form. The dorsal and anal fins are divided into an anterior fin, which is spiny, and a posterior fin, which is soft rays. And then finally, Cyanidae are referred to the drum or croaker family because of the repetitive drumming sounds that they make, particularly males during spawning. The genus name Cyanops derives from the Greek and roughly translates to red mullet-like. And then the species epithet is ocellatus, and this means little eye. So Carl Linnaeus was probably referring to the tail spot on a redfish when he gave this species its Latin name, Cyanops ocellatus, or redfish with little eye. The species is native to the North American coast from around Massachusetts down through northern Mexico. They can actually be found in areas further south than that, through the Caribbean and into South America, but they're relatively rare south of the Gulf. But in the Gulf, they're one of the most common species and are prized as sport fish in all 5 US Gulf states. Redfish are what we call habitat generalists. They can survive in a wide range of conditions. And this may be one of the reasons that they're so common throughout Texas estuaries and in the Gulf. As juveniles, they are generally associated with upper estuaries, for instance, near river mouths where salinity can be brackish or even fresh. And as adults, they prefer open ocean, which has a regular salinity between 30 and 35 parts per thousand. Over their lifespan, though, they can be found in salinities ranging from 0 to 65 parts per thousand on the Texas coast. Most fish species prefer moderately basic pH, around 7.5 to 8.5, and red drum are no different than that, but they can survive up to pH of 9 or even a little higher than that. And then similarly, most fish prefer dissolved oxygen over 5 parts per million. Red drums start to be impaired when oxygen drops below that level. So we like to also call red drum opportunistic feeders, which means that they're hungry. When they're hungry, they'll eat just whatever is available or whatever's in front of them. They are known to eat a wide range of different invertebrates early on in their life, especially crabs and shrimp. They particularly like crabs. During certain parts of the year, blue crab, for instance, make up a big part of their diet. As they grow larger, their food gets larger. So for this reason, as a top predator, they generally transition into piscivory as they get older and larger. In other words, they start eating more fish as they become larger. So the red drum in this slide was actually caught by our crew in Sabine Lake, who were doing a stomach content analysis and found all of these different crab parts in this fish's stomach. Just kind of underscores how much red drum really enjoy eating blue crabs. Like other ray-finned fishes, red drum have both paired fins, like the pectoral and pelvic fins, and unpaired fins, like the caudal fin. They also have nostrils or nares at the front of their head, which are used for smelling but not breathing. And they have a lateral line. In addition to giving fish in general and red drum kind of a complex appearance, this lateral line is also used for sensory function. So it's a row of pores that are along that lateral line that sense pressure changes and give fish signals about navigation, schooling with other fish, and obstacle avoidance. The ocellatus, or false eye, is thought to be a predator defense mechanism. It's this spot on the tail. And especially when they're juveniles, this second eye confuses predators into thinking that they're attacking the head when they're actually attacking the tail. Gives red drum a little bit of an ability to escape predation early on in life. So mature red drum leave the bays and go into the open Gulf of Mexico to spawn. Females can spawn up to 2 million eggs in one night, but an average is about 200,000 to 500,000 eggs per night. But over a single spawning season, a single female can produce close to 30 million eggs. Cell division starts within minutes of the eggs being fertilized, and the eggs hatch within about 24 hours. And then directly after hatch, larvae feed on the yolk sac associated with the egg. And you can see the yolk sac in some of these images on the upper right. That's basically the remnant of the egg that the fish uses for the first few days as a food source. Fins begin developing and larvae begin feeding on their own within about 3 days. So it's a pretty quick process. And larvae grow about 0.6 millimeters per day under optimal conditions. Red drum spawn near passes where their larvae can ideally be transported back into the bays. And I want to just stop real quick here and explain what I'm talking about there. We have bay systems, which are on one side of the barrier islands here in Texas. And then we have the open Gulf of Mexico, which is the offshore area on the other side of the barrier island. And we have these passes that go kind of in between, and red drum use these for spawning. That's where they spawn. And after they're spawning, the eggs and larvae that are the result of that spawn drift on ocean currents back into the bay. So the earliest life stages usually start out in the upper estuary, for instance, near rivers and near natural structures like seagrasses, marsh areas, or oyster reefs, anywhere where they can hide. As they develop into later juveniles and subadults, they tend to move out further into the greater bay system. They mature between 3 to 6 years of age, with males maturing a little bit younger than females. And as they mature, they move out into the Gulf of Mexico to start the process all over again and prepare for spawning. And they spawn between August and October. So that's something that's probably going on starting right about now. Texas Parks and Wildlife has several fishery management tools at our disposal to manage red drum and other game fish. Since the 70s, our agency has used fishery monitoring and fish sampling to track abundance and size of all species occurring on our coastline. Since the 1980s, the Coastal Fisheries Division has helped set reasonable red drum harvest regulations for recreational anglers. And our law enforcement division, our game wardens, have worked to make sure that those regulations, size and bag limits are being observed by our anglers. Since the 2000s, the Coastal Fisheries Division has initiated programs to educate the public about the importance of habitat for red drum, such as seagrasses. And it is now illegal to uproot seagrasses in Texas, and Parks and Wildlife encourages boaters to lift, drift, pole, and troll when they are in seagrass protection areas for that reason. And then finally, stock enhancement is another strategy that we use to manage red drum. And there are now 3 fully operational stock enhancement facilities or hatcheries here in Texas. So as Natalia mentioned, in the 70s and early 80s, the Parks and Wildlife realized that red drum were in severe decline and began formulating plans to bring it back through various forms of management. Work began on the Marine Development Center in Flower Bluff with money provided by the burgeoning Gulf Coast Conservation Association, now referred to as CCA, and land provided by the Central Power and Light Company there in Flower Bluff. The Parks and Wildlife Stock Enhancement Program was raising and releasing red drum into Texas bays by 1983, and then in 1993, parts of the Prairie Bass Marine Fisheries Research Station in Palacios, where I'm located, were repurposed to provide another hatchery for stock enhancement. And then finally in 1996, Sea Center, Texas opened its doors in Lake Jackson and became the 3rd state coastal fish hatchery supporting red drum stock enhancement. And today, all 3 hatcheries support the goal of stock enhancement operations coastwide here in Texas. The hatcheries raise around 20 million fish per year. This number includes red drum, spotted sea trout, and flounder, but by far most of the effort back through time has been on red drum. And stock enhancement continues to be an important piece of the management puzzle for red drum in Texas. The idea behind stock enhancement is to raise and release fish to supplement wild population abundance. To do this, the hatchery program houses mature red drum in large broodstock tanks, like you see on the upper left here, and facilitates spawning in these tanks by manipulating the photoperiod and water temperature in the room to simulate natural conditions. When fish begin spawning, their eggs are skimmed from the brood tanks and measured in volumetric cylinders like the ones on the lower left. Viable eggs, fertilized eggs, float to the top of the water column, and inviable eggs sink. And you can see in this photo the viable eggs up at the top of the column in these cylinders. These eggs are then incubated to hatch in incubation tanks held at ideal conditions that support hatch and early growth of red drum. And the life cycle of red drum in the hatchery is very similar to the life cycle in nature. After about 24 hours, fertilized larvae have begun cell differentiation and start hatching out as yolk sac larvae. And they use that yolk sac again for a few days after they're first hatched. Once they have been incubated to what we call the pre-flexion stage, they start having fins and start looking more like a normal fish. They are ready to start eating on their own. And at that point, they're released into large outdoor rearing ponds. So this is a bird's eye view of the pond setup at the MDC hatchery in Flower Bluff. This was our first marine hatchery. First, feed larvae or larvae that are starting to eat by themselves with their mouth, get stalked into these outdoor ponds and get fed and cultured until they reach about 1 inch in size. And here's a close-up of one of the ponds at my facility in Palacios. This is a half-acre pond, but we have everything from half-acre up to 4 acres. Smaller ponds typically yield anything up to about 100,000 fish per cycle, and larger ponds can yield up to about 1 million fish. So they get stocked into these ponds. They're grown out for about a month until they get to about 1 inch. Then the ponds are drained, the fish are collected, and they're ready to stock. In this pond, the device in the very middle is a paddle wheel, which is used to oxygenate ponds in midsummer, which is when we do a lot of our stock enhancement, when oxygen levels can drop pretty dramatically overnight. So again, after about 30 to 45 days, the larvae have transitioned into juveniles and have begun feeding on larger feed. At that point, they have grown to about 1 inch and are ready to be stocked into the wild. And the hatcheries all have special trailers like this one pictured that are used to transport fingerling fish to their stocking site. And we try to stock early in the morning so that the stocking trailers don't get too warm. And as they're traveling, oxygen is pumped into these trailers to keep the water oxygenated along the way. And then finally, as part of our management program, the Parks and Wildlife Department uses bag seines, which are deployed on a monthly basis to keep track of the abundance and size of all juvenile fish on our coast. And these bag seine samples allow the agency to determine the abundance of natural populations of small juvenile red drum in each bay system. And so when we stock fish, our stocking allocations, or the numbers that we're putting in different bay systems, are based on natural abundance in bag seines the year before. So in other words, stock enhancement is tailored to bays that have declining abundance from year to year, with less emphasis on bays that had good natural abundance in the previous year, and more emphasis on bays that had poor natural abundance in that previous year. Okay, so at this point, hopefully everybody's still with me. I'd like to transition into the next presentation, which is the history of red drum regulation in Texas.
Can I add one thing about the Marine Development Center?
Absolutely.
I wanted to say that the Marine Development Center, you can schedule tours there. And if you are an educator, you can also do field trips to that hatchery. And for educational reasons only, you can go fish the stocked ponds. So they have, I think, 2 ponds that are just for that educational fishing to be done at the Marine Development Center, which, yeah, but you need to make a reservation or reach out to schedule a tour. So, and that can be found just on the website. But a great resource for everyone, I think, and for educators as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that, that's actually true for 2 of our 3 hatcheries. The Sea Center Texas up in Lake Jackson has the same general opportunities, and they also have a very large aquarium system that's kind of similar to what you see in other public aquaria. The difference is that it's totally free. So you can go to Lake Jackson, to the Sea Center, go through the aquarium area and see lots of cool fish, including big sharks and tarpon and the red drum. And also, if scheduled properly, get a behind the scenes tour of the hatchery as well. You can do that here in Palacios at my facility as well, but we don't have the big broodstock here. We're just a grow out facility. So we have ponds to look at, and sometimes we can dip those ponds and show the tiny little redfish, but we don't have the big aquaria that you can see at both MDC and Sea Center. Thanks, Italia. So Parks and Wildlife has a lot of different fishery management tools at their disposal to determine whether current fishing levels are sustainable. And I touched on a few of these in the previous presentation, but just as a review, we have our own data collection techniques, such as gillnet sampling, to let us know what's going on with population size and abundance. We have research programs to study the biology of the fish species that we manage, including red drum. We have law enforcement game wardens that enforce fishing regulations and make fishing a fair activity for all anglers. We also gather data directly from our anglers during fisheries creel surveys to get a sense for what they're targeting and also what they're landing. And creel surveys allow us to evaluate the overall impact of recreational fishing on the populations that we manage. So when we put all of these sources of data together, we can get a sense for whether current fishing practices are sustainable or whether stricter regulations are necessary. So in the 1970s, several pieces of data suggested that red drum in Texas were in the midst of a crash. In fact, all 5 Gulf states began noticing some pretty alarming trends in their red drum fisheries. Here in Texas, concerned anglers began calling up their local biologists and reporting that they were catching fewer and smaller red drum during their angling trips. And the Parks and Wildlife gillnets told the same story. In the mid 1970s, right about the time we began using gillnets, there was a fairly dramatic decline in catch rates. And the plot you're seeing on the screen right now shows the decline on the far left, right at the beginning of our data collection. And we measure abundance, or we estimate abundance based on how many red drum we catch in a standard overnight gill net set per hour. So we deploy these nets coast-wide in a very systematic and regular way during certain times of the year. So that's what we call an unbiased glimpse into relative abundance in the population. And as you can see, the decline was fast and dramatic. Things bottomed out right around 1977, and it had lasting effects on the population. So this is abundance. There were also impacts to the size of landed fish, and these started a little bit earlier. This plot charts the average size of red drum in Parks and Wildlife gill nets from 1975 through 2023. The y-axis is in millimeters, but I've also projected the current 20-inch minimum size to give everyone kind of a familiar way to scale this data. You can see that the size of the average gillnet red drum in the late 1970s and early 1980s was around 400 millimeters, or close to 16 inches. And you can see where we're at more recently. Clearly, the population in the 1970s was not near its potential with regard to average size. And low average size also pertains to lower average age. Smaller fish are younger fish. And average age matters because the more older fish there are in the population, the more mature adults will be around when it comes time for spawning. So how did this happen? The simple answer, as Natalia said earlier, is overfishing. The plot you see on your screen right now, and I apologize, this is poor resolution. This is kind of from an older study, but this is the tracked landings of spotted sea trout and red drum from 1950 and 1980. When I say landings, that is what is caught and brought to shore. Red drum are the solid black line here, and this data is from a paper that was published in the 1980s. You can see in a span of about 20 years, commercial landings went from a few 100,000 pounds per year in the 1950s to millions of pounds in the mid-1970s prior to regulations setting in. And this level of fishing was simply not sustainable for red drum. So the abundance and size data that Texas Parks and Wildlife was looking at, in concert with the concerns from recreational anglers, suggested that something needed to be done to conserve this iconic sport fish. And so for the next several slides, I'm going to step through actions that were taken either by the Texas legislature or by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission that were intended to be protective of redfish in Texas. As I point to each regulation with a star, you can see the the effect that it had on the population in the years following the star. And you'll see that the combination of several years of regulations is really what brought this species back from the brink. So starting in 1977, the Texas legislature passed the Red Drum Conservation Act, which allowed the agency to set new restrictions on recreational and commercial harvest in Texas. It also established a special commercial red drum license that could be only purchased during the month of September, which somewhat limited entry into the commercial fishery. So the first time in 1977, the agency set a daily bag limit for red drum at 10 fish per day. And at that time, there had been a minimum size in place of 14 inches starting around the 1950s. In 1979, Texas prohibited the use of single-strand monofilament gill nets, which is a very specific type of fishing gear. It was prohibited for commercial and recreational use. The problem with this gear was that it was highly effective for indiscriminately landing all manner of sport fish with minimal effort. And this prohibition, was followed up in 1980 by prohibiting all gill nets in Texas bays for recreational or commercial use. In 1981, you may have heard the fabled Redfish Bill. This was technically House Bill 1000, designated red drum and spotted sea trout as game fish and prohibited their commercial sale. This effectively ended the commercial fishery for these species in Texas. The recreational bag limit remained the same at 10 fish per day at this point. However, the agency raised the minimum size to 16 inches from 14 inches and imposed the first slot limit by implementing a maximum size of 30 inches. Stock enhancement efforts, as I've already mentioned, ramped up considerably in the 1980s, and the first hatchery, which at that time was called the John Wilson Hatchery, now MDC, opened in 1983. And this facility, as I mentioned, is still in operation in Flower Bluff and still pumping out fish. Shortly after that, in 1984, the red drum daily bag limit was lowered to 5, and the minimum size of the slot was raised from 16 inches to 18 inches. And you can see the population is kind of moving up in abundance as we go across this timeline. In 1985, a saltwater fishing stamp was added to the portfolio of license required by anglers. This didn't directly benefit red drum, but the benefit of such a stamp was that the agency now had a way to estimate fishing effort in the recreational fishery. Prior to 1985, there's no way to know how many license holders were fishing on the coast versus those that were fishing in freshwater lakes or rivers. In the mid-1980s, several actions occurred simultaneously that finally set red drum population loose and accelerated a population boom. First, in 1986, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce limited sale of red drum from federal waters in an emergency rule. And then 1 year later, the federal fishery was closed due to concerns about overfishing that were similar to the concerns that we had here in Texas. And then finally, in 1988, Parks and Wildlife closed Texas waters to all entanglement nets, not just gill nets, but trammel nets and any nets that are set that just entangle fish indiscriminately. And this trammel nets, for instance, were another incredibly effective gear used by the commercial fishery that was fishing for other species at that time. So the current regulations for trout were also implemented for the first time in 1988. A 3-fish daily bag limit with a slot size of 20 to 28 inches, and that's been in place for almost 40 years now. Other Gulf states began closing their waters to the commercial red drum fishery in the late 1980s due to similar overfishing concerns, but Texas was the standard bearer here. We were first. And in 2007, former governor of Texas, George W. Bush, as president of the United States, issued Executive Order 13449, permanently prohibiting the sale of red drum caught in federal waters. One other regulatory change of note here, in 1994, Texas implemented the red drum tag, allowing anglers to keep one red drum over 28 inches, and this is commonly called a trophy tag. So at this point, I kind of wanted to take a step back and explain kind of the intentions behind fishing regulations. At their core, or at their heart, fishing regulations are simply meant to control fishing mortality, or the rate at which individuals are removed from the population by fishing. And different types of regulations do different things. So for instance, bag limits control mortality indiscriminately. They're kind of a blunt force tactic meant to simply limit the total number of individuals being removed. So the 3-fish bag limit in Texas is meant to allow anglers to take home some fish while also being conservative about how much can be taken each day. On the other hand, size limits are more nuanced and are meant to provide protection for certain size classes in the population. The current slot limit in Texas is meant to protect the youngest age classes, potentially allowing them to get to spawning size, while also the oldest age classes, which have the highest reproductive potential. And slot limits are frequently used in this way to manage trophy fisheries. They're thought to be the best practice for allowing some harvest, but also promoting the catch and take of some trophy-sized individuals as well. So what happened after all these regulations were put into place? The figure on the screen right now tracks both mean total length in black and mean age in gray through the years. And you can see that both length and age of red drum increased throughout the 1980s, topped out around 1995, and have been relatively stable ever since. Here is some of the more kind of inside baseball data that we use to track the health of red drum populations. Again, mortality is the rate at which fish are removed from the population due to all sources, including both natural and fishery mortality. And we were able to track mortality using mathematical formulas based on changes in size through time. And you can see that mortality has dropped to a fraction of what it was in the early 1980s, which of course is a great thing for our red drum populations. Escapement, on the other hand, is the percentage of adult red drum that live to mature adulthood and escape to the offshore spawning population under fishing versus what would be expected in the absence of fishing. And you can see that escapement skyrocketed in the 1980s and has remained stable ever since at about 70% since 1990. So in other words, 70% of the fishable population escapes to go spawn offshore. This is kind of a summary table of then and now, and it's a comparison of all the different metrics we use to determine the health of fish populations. Red drum catch rates approximately doubled from 1980 through the 1990s and have remained stable ever since during that course of fishery regulation. The average length went up about 2 inches during the recovery, and this translated into an average age that nearly doubled between 1980 and 1990. And remember, that average age is important for a fish population because it goes towards the spawning potential of that population. Older individuals spawn, so we want more older individuals in the population. Annual survival, which is basically the inverse of mortality that I showed earlier, nearly doubled from 33% to 61%. In other words, 33% of the adult population was surviving from year to year under the previous regime. After regulations, it's 61%, almost double. And then escapement also has nearly doubled from 35% in 1980 to over 70% after 1990. So just kind of a summary of this second part of my talk. Red drum were on the brink of fishery collapse in the 1970s, and aggressive fishery management regulations in both the 17 and 80s throughout the Gulf slowly improved the size and abundance of red drum in Texas. So this is something that happened Gulf-wide, but I like to think Texas was kind of the standard bearer because we started to notice this and really attack it as an issue first. The Texas Parks and Wildlife is going to continue to manage red drum with bag limits, slot limits, and allowance for the take of trophy individuals. We believe this gives our anglers the best chance to harvest multiple fish during a trip, but then also keep an eye out for those trophy fish as well. Cooperative management among the 5 Gulf states and the federal government will continue to be pursued through interjurisdictional bodies like the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission. This is a body where all 5 Gulf states get together and talk about lots of different fisheries issues. And red drum is certainly a priority for all 5 Gulf states, and it has been for some time. And then finally, the history of red drum in Texas and the Greater Gulf is one of the most impressive fishery management recoveries in my mind in the history of fishery management, and it's an incredible success story that Texans can be proud of. And I believe we're at our break. Natalia, is there anything you wanted to mention before we go into the break?
No, I really appreciate all that you shared. Super informative. We did have some questions in the thread that I'm working on responding to. I mostly was just curious if y'all wanted to look at those and see if any of them were ones that you wanted to just quickly address. I've been trying to respond to them. And like I said, with questions, hopefully I can send a follow-up email with the sheet of questions that didn't get answered in the webinar. So yeah, we have a couple in here. But yeah,
there's one from Marion about the downward trend in number of fish per hour. We've noticed that too, and that could be just sampling error. So when we go out and sample, sometimes our samples aren't fully representative of what's going on in the fish population. And if that happens a couple years in a row, that can cause that downward trend. But it's something we're definitely keeping an eye on because popularity of red drum in Texas has pretty much skyrocketed. So we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that downward trend and manage accordingly. Why do some red drum have more than 10 spots? That's a real mystery. I think those are just genetic anomalies. As far as I know, nobody has answered that question definitively. But the way that genes work, sometimes they're expressed in some cells and sometimes they're not expressed in other cells. In a normal red drum, those cells that are expressed are generally located near the tail. But there may be some genetic mutations that cause those cells to be expressed, or those genes, excuse me, to be expressed throughout the body. But it's a great question, and it's one that I don't think has ever been definitively answered.
I like hearing all the theories that people have. I know one of them is that the people think that stalked reds are the ones with the multiple dots, but it's really fun to get curious about why these things happen. Some of the questions that are in here, are about regulations. I'm trying my best to answer them. Regulations are, I always recommend people to refer to the Outdoor Annual app, or reach out to a game warden if there's something that you really don't see or find in the Outdoor Annual app. But I will try my best to send you the proper regulation. But like I said, that's yeah, I try to leave it to the uh, LE team or law enforcement to answer those definitively. So
There's one in here from Randy that is kind of an interesting one. Have heard that Lake Calaveras and Lake Browning also have these saltwater fish, and that's accurate. Both Calaveras and Browning, freshwater lakes near San Antonio, have red drum. The reason they have red drum is because Parks and Wildlife puts them there. Before that, these are both man-made reservoirs. They're power plant cooling lakes. And the reason that they were put there is that when these lakes were basically constructed, they didn't have any opportunities for anglers. And through trial and error, they started stocking multiple fish in there. I think they've stocked stripers in there before and a few other species, but red drum do particularly well in those lakes. And so on an annual basis, Parks and Wildlife puts somewhere between 4 and 600,000 fish into each of those lakes. And so if you catch a red drum in one of those two lakes, it actually came from my facility here in Palacios, the Perry R. Bass Marine Fisheries Research Station and Hatchery. And you're right, the reason that they can exist there is because those turbines, those electric turbines generate a lot of heat that is dissipated into those lakes. So it's kind of a thermal, nice warm bath for the red drum during the wintertime that helps them survive in conditions that would otherwise be unsurvivable for a saltwater fish. Cool question.
nice. We're doing really great on time. So if you did want to look through any more of those, we can, or we can start the break now and then come back in like 10 minutes. Does that sound okay, or did you want to shorten the break to get to more questions?
Is the break scheduled for 7 o'clock or 10 till?
Yeah, 7 o'clock.
Can hit probably a couple more of these.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's one about Chad is asking, did the freeze in February a few years ago negatively affect the population? It did, but red drum are a little bit hardier than a lot of other species, so it really hammered the spotted sea trout. And I don't think redfish took the same hit that spotted sea trout took. So the answer is yes, but not in the same way as what we saw for spotted sea trout. Then David asked, do saltwater fisheries, do Texas saltwater fisheries raise other fish than speckled trout and redfish? And the answer is yes. We also raise flounder. It's the one species that we raise and release during the winter. The other two are summer and fall hatchery projects.
I will say the MDC the Marine Development Center has a really great flounder, I don't know, I guess example for y'all to go see that in action. And it is really fascinating, and those tiny, tiny flounder are very cute. So it's wintertime.
Michael Smith asks, what freshwater lakes was that for red drum? That's Lake Calaveras and Lake Victor Braunig, both of which are southeast of San Antonio. Don asked, instead of using a net to catch samples, have you used an electric shock? As it turns out, electrofishing doesn't work very well in saltwater because it's a different type of conductance. You really need to be in freshwater to use electroshocking to sample fish. But our inland fisheries uses that technique all the time to sample different reservoirs in Texas. Mason asked, of the millions of fish in the wild, is there any type of evidence how many make it to adulthood in the bays? So for red drum, there was some genetic studies that were done about 10 or 15 years ago that shows that from year to year, that's very valuable or very variable. It's anywhere from 2 to 5% up to 20%, depending on which bay system and what year you're looking at. And the way that we look at that is that red drum are supplementing the population in years where there's poor natural recruitment. But in years where there's good natural recruitment, that contribution is probably quite a bit lower from our hatcheries. I don't know. Should I keep going here? David asked about snook. We are not doing stock enhancement for snook, but that's a species that's kind of enhancing itself on our coastline right now. That's a tropical species that we're seeing more of and every year. And I think probably in 15, 20 years down the road, that might be a pretty common species for anglers here in Texas.
That would be really fun, especially for fly anglers. There's some questions about speckled trout, and I'm going to send I can actually send it in response to the chat to everyone. We did a spotted sea trout webinar in September. The Angler Ed manager and one of the Citizen Science Project guys did that webinar in September, and I will send y'all the recording. And hopefully that'll approach or answer some of y'all's questions when it comes to that species. But yeah, I think so. 6:50. If you want to, we can break now, and then let's come back at 7. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, welcome back. I was able to dig around our YouTube channel and find some more resources when it comes to the speckled trout. I did send one link to a webinar that Angler Ed did, and that one might be a little bit more angler focused and fishing tactic focused. But I will send you the one that the Coastal Fisheries Division did a couple years ago. May not be like the most up-to-date information, but could give you some insight on some of those questions that y'all had. And I will let David take it away for the fun part, the fishing.
Thanks, Natalia. And thanks again to Joel for those awesome presentations. Joel actually just won an Employee Recognition Award with Texas Parks and Wildlife for conservation, and he's just a wealth of knowledge and an amazing scientist.
Thanks, David.
And,
Appreciate it.
yeah, no problem. Without further ado, go ahead and get on with the fishing approach. And here is a younger me. It's probably like 10 years ago, back fresh out of college, and used to fish a whole lot more. But it's funny thinking back. I used to focus a lot more on the fish, and it's kind of like paralleled my career at TPWD. So now I focus a lot more on the ecology of redfish and kind of look bigger picture and look at kind of how they interact with their habitat and the game fish, or the prey fish. So I feel like I've definitely grown as an angler since then. Okay, so let's start off where you can find redfish. I know some days it seems like they're everywhere, and a lot of days it feels like they're nowhere. But in reality, you can find redfish, like Joel mentioned, from South Padre all the way up to Sabine, and you can find them offshore, inshore, near the passes and near like creek and river mouths. So I'll kind of start with the offshore. Um, you're typically going to find more of the adults offshore. They Once they reach a certain size, they move offshore to until it's time to spawn, and then they'll congregate at the passes. But I honestly don't fish for the adults offshore much at all. But if I had to look for them, I would look at some of the natural and artificial reefs and structures like oil rigs. If you go onto Texas Parks and Wildlife's artificial reef viewer, you can get coordinates for some of these artificial reefs. And these are going to be, I'd probably look at some of these blue star areas, the ones that are a little bit closer in. Next, moving inshore a little bit, is the surf. A lot of anglers like targeting redfish in the surf. Texas has over 300 miles of beaches, so it's a lot of places spread out. When you're fishing the beach, again, like, I wouldn't say I'm the most experienced surf fisherman. I spend most of my time inshore in the bays, but the times that I have, I kind of target these different guts. You can see I got a picture here, the wade gut. This is where most anglers are gonna like fish with lures, topwater spoons, plastics, and even into that first gut. And these guts are separated by sandbars. And a lot of fishermen get to the beach and try to kind of bomb it out as far as they can, but a lot of times those fish are in those closer guts, especially on the less crowded beaches. You can actually find them pretty close in. But some key things will be looking for bait like mullet, and also looking for birds, either birds actively feeding or sitting on the shoreline. A lot of times when the birds are full, they'll just float into shore and sit on the shoreline. So right out where they're sitting, a lot of times you'll find fish. Next, go over the passes. One of the best places to find redfish are at passes, especially where there's jetties. And like you can see in this picture, these rock formations are jetties. they're typically built, jetties are typically built with large rocks or stones, and they're put in place to stabilize a pass and prevent erosion. You can kind of see the sand piling up here. And to orient you, the Gulf is what's not pictured, and you can see the bay on this other side of the barrier island. And so this is where those adult redfish are going to congregate, either like in the pass or like right in front in the Gulf side, or they'll move up and down this channel into the bay. And so fall is going to be a great time of the year to fish these passes. And you can fish them from the jetties, you can fish them from a boat. Even like the surf around these passes will be good in the fall. And live bait artificials, typically you'll go with a little bit heavier setups for those bull redfish, but just keep that in mind in the fall. And here's a map I found on the internet, going over some of the different passes along the coast. Some of them may not be listed. I know I had to add Cedar Bayou and then Fish Pass jetties, which is not a true pass, but there are a set of jetties there by the Mustang Island State Park. So my advice is to get onto Google Earth, Google Maps, and look in your area and try to find which pass or jetties is closest to you. And then moving even further inshore, on the other side of the barrier islands, Texas has 7 estuaries, which are known and managed as 8 major base systems. And it has over 3,300 miles of basin estuary, so that's a lot of places for fish to hide, I know. And some things you'll notice looking at this map is there's a lot more freshwater inflow in the northern part of Texas compared to the southern end, and that changes the habitat that you'll find, and it can change water clarity. On the southern end in like the coastal bend, it's kind of known for its seagrass and its clearer water, and that's partially due to the clear water is due to the seagrass, and I think it's due to less river inflow, bringing in nutrients and dirtying it up. And then you'll also sometimes see like shifts in habitat, like these northern bays may be a little bit more muddy from the nutrients from these rivers, and these southern bays a little bit more sandy. And moving on to habitat, like Joel mentioned, redfish are habitat generalists, and so um, they'll live in a variety of different habitats, and it's important to kind of understand what habitats are in the bay system that you're fishing and how those redfish and when they might utilize them. I'll go into that a little bit further. Other habitats like docks and bridges and piers, these man-made structures also provide really good redfish habitat. And essentially, fish and other marine life like these complex habitats compared to bare open bottom because it gives them a place to hide and it gives predators a place to ambush. So each of these areas is a hot spot for marine life. And then this is for people, mainly for people that might be newer to fishing saltwater. I feel like anglers have a lot of different lingo that you'll hear, and so you may hear somebody talking about fish in the flats, and you may not understand what that is. Um, in a lot of Texas-based systems, the water is relatively shallow, and anglers will call these shallow areas flats. And so you can see pictured this kind of darker area behind these islands. That's what we would call a grass flat. And then this kind of more tan area towards the top of the picture, top of the map, is what we would call a sand flat. And so just keep that in mind as you're fishing or as you're talking to other fishermen. If you hear the word like fishing flats or fishing the grass flat. Next, another good area to find redfish is around spoil islands. And a spoil island is essentially an island that was created from dredge material. So when they cut this channel right here, they place the material into piles, and eventually those piles of spoil gets settled by different plants and birds will nest on it. But there'll be little guts and channels around it from them, either hydrology or um, the barges they use to place the dredge spoil. And so these areas are great places to find redfish, especially as the water's like falling out. Um, they'll get in here as the water kind of funnels through it. Next term is pothole. This is not just the big hole in the road. Fishermen use this term to describe sand and mud pockets in seagrass beds. And so you can see in this picture, this lighter kind of tan area is what fishermen call a pothole. And these redfish use these areas to ambush prey. So a lot of times they'll either sit in the hole or they'll sit kind of on the edges. And so as you're fishing out there, if you're drifting or if you're wade fishing, you want to kind of like fan cast and make sure to hit different areas of these holes or try to set up your drift to cover a set of potholes because a lot of times those fish will be sitting in there. All right, next term I have is back lakes. This is a place that I love to fish. I love fishing as shallow as I can. And back lakes are basically a semi-enclosed like a body of water or a pond that's just off of the main body of water. And so pictured here is the Nueces Delta, and these are some marsh ponds that are near the river opening. I think the river opening's out of the picture, but um, these back lakes are great places for shrimp and crabs and mullet and killifish to hide, and the redfish will follow them back in there. And this is a great place to find like tail and redfish, schools of reds. And that leads me to the next term, which is drains. And so drains are going to be referring to the cuts that connect these back lakes or marsh ponds to the main body of water. But drains can also be like a cut between some spoil islands or cuts, deeper channels that are coming off of a flat. And so if you hear fishermen talking about fishing the drains, it's typically a cut that transitions from shallow water to deeper water. Okay, next I wanted to kind of touch on tides and water levels because redfish, they love to get shallow, and you really need to know what's kind of going on with the water levels in order to kind of maximize your redfish fishing. And one thing I hear a lot is people saying that, oh, the tides are low right now, or the tide's high, and which when they really mean the water level is low or the water level is high. Um, in Texas, we have a very minimal lunar tide compared to like the East Coast where they have a swing of like many feet. Here, it may only swing like a foot or inches. And so it's important to know what the lunar tide is because that'll kind of affect the current, but the overall water level will be affected by wind and weather kind of more so than the lunar tides. When the two complement each other, like in the fall and winter when we get really strong northern winds and fronts coming through, when that is coupled with um, a low tide during like a new or full moon, that can really affect the water level and it can really push a lot of water out of the bay system. And that can cause a feed because all of those marshes and back lakes are going to drain, and so those fish are going to kind of sit in those funnels and ambush prey. And so it's important to kind of know the difference between the two and know how you can use that information to benefit you. Um, and there's many apps that'll tell you the tides because it's based on the moon phase, and so you can plan trips far in advance based on the tide, but know that the water level may be different based on the weather patterns that we've had. And typically, wintertime, lower tides, like spring, you'll experience higher tides. In summer, right now, it's really low, um, mainly because evaporation happens during the summer. But just understanding those patterns will make you a better angler and knowing like which areas you can access. Okay, next, kind of like following this trend of how the moon affects redfish fishing. There's something called lunar phases, and typically fish like redfish tend to be more active during certain times of the day when the sun and the moon influence the tide, light, and animal behavior. And these patterns are called lunar phases, and they kind of help you predict when the fish are most likely to feed. And so you have major feeding times and minor feeding times. And there's also apps that you can track these as well, and some of them give you a rating for the day. But essentially, the major feeding times are when the moon is directly above or below, and these last for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then the minors are when the moon is rising and when it's setting. And these are a little bit shorter, like usually just an hour long. And it's important to know these. It's like an added bonus, but I wouldn't, if the app tells you that the percentage is low for a certain day, I wouldn't use that as an excuse not to go fishing. I've still had great fishing on days where it's not projected to be good just because I looked at when the major or minor would be and I just kind of keyed in on that more opportune time. Also know that sometimes depending on like what the app says, it can be off by an hour or two from what it says. So it's important just to go fishing when you can. And if it lines up with these majors and minors, it's just a bonus. Another thing I want to touch on with moon phases is redfish will also feed at night, and they redfish really are kind of visual feeders when there is the good water clarity. So a lot of times fish will feed at night, especially during a full moon, and that may affect the fishing during the day. And so I typically struggle on full moon days during the day because those fish were up all night feeding. So kind of leading up to a full moon and after it, I'll struggle during the day. But I bet if I went fishing at night, I would be more successful. And the opposite's kind of true for that new moon. And so it's kind of important to just keep track of what the moon is doing, and it may explain what you're seeing on the water. So I know I threw a lot at you, and it seems like there's a lot of different variables that may affect redfish, but it doesn't have to be so complicated. It doesn't have to feel like math. Um, T.A. Richardson from Flats Class University has a video where he calls it his in-short cheat code, and he basically goes over hunger, temperature regulation, reproduction, and anthropogenic factors, which is a big word for how humans um, interact or affect something, in this case redfish. And so if you focus on kind of those four things, you'll be in a good place to find more redfish. And now talking about the different seasons, like I mentioned, fall with the bull redfish run, that's probably going to be your best time to find fish congregated. If you can get to the passes, you have a good shot of catching a redfish, maybe your personal best redfish. But fall also lines up with a lot of bait immigration. So this is bait fish and crustaceans that are leaving the bay system, usually to spawn offshore. And I'll get into that later. And then wintertime, usually as the water temperature is starting to lower, these fish are going to be transitioning to mud because mud is a little bit more temperature stable, but it also means that there's going to be less phytoplankton in the water, and the water is going to clear up a little bit, which offers some good sight casting opportunity. And then moving into spring, spring can also be a great time to fish because um, there's a lot of bait coming into the bay system and bait fish being recruited. And so sometimes you'll hear that there's like a shrimp hatch going on in an area. And what that means is there's some larval shrimp that drifted into that area, and now they're going through their life cycle. And redfish really key in on these bait migrations. And typically I'll transition during the spring from fishing mud, and as the temperature gets warmer, I'll shift to fishing more grass. And then summer, great time to catch redfish. I'll typically start targeting more sand and grass, and um, fishing near deep water as it gets really hot. I'll kind of notice that those channels and water coming from the passes is kind of like um, arteries in your body, and it gives life to the areas around it. And so those shallow areas next to deeper water will be good places to find redfish, um, and kind of a little bit deeper flats. But I'll kind of talk about the nuances on that too, because you can find fish shallow uh, pretty much year round as well. And here I kind of show the differences on a map of these different sediment types. And this may not be something that most anglers kind of consider when they go fishing, but more muddy areas like the Nueces Delta on this top, you can see it with this lighter brown color. It's typically going to hold more fish when it's colder. Mud is more temperature stable and kind of holds heat for longer compared to sand, which I have on this lower picture. And sand is going to be great for fish that are looking to warm up on a sunny day. And so just kind of keeping those different sediment types in mind will help you find more redfish and help you pattern them a little bit better. And here are kind of some of the general numbers to go by. So this 65 to 75 degree temperature is ideal. And once it hits that 80 to 90 threshold, fish kind of start to seek cooler water. And then on the flip side, once it hits about the 50s, fish are going to be looking for that little bit deeper, muddier water to stay warm. And I'll say all this with the caveat that redfish are kind of like people in the sense that they like consistent weather. And so if it's been cold consistently, those fish get acclimated to it, and you'll still find redfish shallow, even if it is a colder water temperature. And the same thing for it being hot. I think I went fishing this past weekend, and the water temperature was in the high 80s, almost 90, and I was still finding redfish in a foot of water. And so if it's consistently a temperature, they get comfortable in it. But if there's like a major change, like if it's cold all of a sudden and it's been hot, those fish are going to react to it until they get used to it. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then I know there's a lot going on here. You may want to take a picture of this chart. But basically, this is just showcasing the spawning season and where these different prey species spawn, and when the juveniles and larvae are going to recruit to the estuary. And so if you can get an understanding of when these events are happening in the bay system that you're fishing, you'll be able to kind of capitalize on that a little bit more, maybe like match the hatch. Um, but it's definitely helped me kind of knowing when these different prey species are spawning or recruiting. So finally getting to the different strategies for catching redfish. I truly believe redfish is a fish that's for everybody. There's so many different ways that you can catch them, whether you're shore-based, fishing from piers, jetties, whether you're wade fishing. That's honestly one of the best ways to catch redfish. Kayak fishing, again, another one of the best. You can get to places other people can't with a kayak, and then fishing out of a boat. And so if you're not having luck fishing for redfish, one strategy, I encourage you to try another. I love redfish because you can sight cast for them pretty often. I think that's um, the iconic symbol of a redfish is them tailing, and so just knowing that you can catch these fish deep and shallow, um, you can really like specialize in whatever type of fishing kind of suits your personality style better. If you have the patience to sit in one place and wait for the fish to come by, then you're going to be a good like shore-based or even boat, um, live or dead bait angler. But if you're like me and you have ADHD and you need to be moving at all times, then you should probably give kayaking or wading or boat, like maybe pulling a boat around. And it's more of like a hunting style. But no matter which type of strategy you're using to find these fish, it's important to think about the water column that they're in. Even in this picture, you can tell that it's pretty shallow. It's probably no more than 3 feet deep. And even in this area, there's different sections of the water column that you can cover. And so you can fish the surface with top waters. There's suspending baits, and then there's baits that'll be better for fishing the bottom. And those fish, depending on their activity level, will be in different zones of the water. And another important thing to think about while you're red fishing is using the redfish, their senses to your advantage. And so, like I mentioned before, redfish have pretty good eyesight, and they can, in clear water, can see a lure from a decent distance. They also have, being in the drum family, are pretty aware of sounds that are going on. And so a lot of baits, so I have any, a lot of baits have rattles in them. You see like this topwater. And so being aware of what sounds you're making is another thing, like trying to be pretty stealthy yourself, because those fish will pick up on that. But the sounds that your lures are making, and sometimes when the fish are really spooky, like high pressure bluebird sky days, um, making sure that you don't have any sound sometimes works better. Um, and then their sense of smell. A lot of redfish have a pretty good sense of smell, and a lot of anglers and guides use this to their advantage by fishing with more oily baits like menhaden, like cut ladyfish or skipjack or cut mullet. And so you can really attract fish into an area uh, if you're using these more oily baits, or if you're fishing with artificials by using adding scent to your bait. And then last, using their lateral line. Redfish really use this sense to find prey in murky or off-colored water, and throwing baits that have a little bit of a vibration, or using live bait that is really putting off a lot of activity will help those fish find your bait. And next I wanted to kind of go over some of the different rigs that you might use to catch redfish. So one of the more popular rigs is going to be your popping cork. And so there's lots of different styles of the actual cork. Some of them have this concave mouth that makes a popping sound, and some of them are ovals, and you have like kind of some smaller profiles. And so you can adjust that to how active the fish are. Maybe go to a smaller cork when they're a little bit more shy. And then I wanted to show this slip cork rig because I feel like this is something not a lot of people throw, but this is one that would be really good at the jetties here during this fall. And essentially this rig allows you to use a cork in a little bit deeper water and not have to cast the whole leader because it would be really awkward to try to throw a leader that's 8 feet long. But with this cork, you have this little slip knot that you can move up and down your line and adjust how deep you want it to fish. Next, have a dropper rig, and this is a pretty simple rig, and you can make it a bunch of different ways. You can use 3-way swivels. I honestly, when I fish it, I usually just do one hook. If you were to catch 2 redfish on one line, it would be a pretty fun fight, but usually I just do one rig. I also will tie this with just a single swivel and just tie the hook onto either the main line end or the leader going to the weight. And for this rig, it's important to, at least the way I fish it, I like to make this leader going to the hook shorter than the leader going to the sinker. And for me, it just gives me more sensitivity. If a fish pulls on this, you'll feel it on the main line. And if you do it the opposite, sometimes you won't feel that bite because there's so much slack in it, and it's pulling more on the weight. And so I just make sure to make this leader a little bit shorter than the sinker leader. And there's different knots you can tie this, which is the way I prefer, where you don't really have any hardware and it's just all different fishing knots. Like I think a blood knot is the knot that you use for that, or you can use a Palomar knot. Next rig is going to be the Carolina rig. And some people call this a fish finder rig, but I found that this fish finder rig is something different, but a similar concept. But essentially with the Carolina rig, this is in areas that don't have a lot of debris or structure on the bottom where you're going to get hung up, because this is going to roll around in the current and essentially find the fish. So this is good if you're fishing the surf and there's not a lot of people around you, and you can really let that bait flow down that gut with the current or in a channel or something, and increase your odds of finding the fish. And then kind of wanted to give an overview of different styles of hooks and kind of give my preferences. This first one, an octopus hook, is essentially like in between a J hook and a circle hook. It's got a little bit more open gap. I like that option. The circle hook is a good option for redfish. A lot of times redfish, when they hit it, and they kind of like take it and slam the rod down. And so the circle hook is a great choice because these hooks essentially set themselves. You're not supposed to set the hook. And it's supposed to hook them in the corner of the mouth. It's not completely foolproof, but I have had better hookup ratios with circle hooks, fishing with live bait, and place for J hooks, but I honestly don't fish J hooks with bait very often just because it increases the chance of them swallowing the hook. And then treble hooks, another one that I don't use often. They can get swallowed easy and they kind of do more damage to the fish. So if you plan on keeping the fish, then by all means, but I prefer not to use treble hooks when I can. And then another hook that I don't really use as often are these offset hooks, and you can just see to the non-offset. how it kind of flares out to the side. And this is another one I've just noticed more fish swallowing the hook with. This kale style hook is a popular hook for live and dead bait. Um, and that's another one that I personally will use. And I'll use this more so when I'm actually setting the hook versus like letting the hook set itself. And then briefly just going to go over different sizes of hook, different hook sizes for people. So if you see a number without this little aught /0, these are going to be typically smaller hooks. And so for redfish fishing, typically using like a 3/0 and bigger. Depending on what size redfish, like if you're going for bull redfish, then a 6 or 7/0 may be better, depending on the size of the bait you're using. And then looking at some live bait riggings, shrimp is one of the most popular lures for, or not lures, baits for redfish. And there's a few different ways to hook them. One of the ways that's popular is hooking them underneath this horn, also called a rostrum. And there's some areas you want to avoid, like you can see this little dark spot here are its organs and its brain. So you want to try to avoid that and hook it in this gap underneath the rostrum as pictured here, and that'll keep that shrimp a little bit more lively. Another good bait for redfish are different bait fish like croaker or mullet, and there's a couple different ways to hook those. Hooking mullet underneath the chin, out the head, usually keeps them alive for a decent amount of time. And then a lot of people hook croaker near the anal fin, and that kind of keeps them righted, swimming the right way, and provides good hookups. And then for cut bait, some different examples of how to rig cut bait. I really just want to make sure that bait's not going to fall out and it's going to be some good for setting the hook. In here, redfish, I might cut the tail off on that guy just a little. And a couple more examples for rigging up shrimp. And this top one with the jig head, this is a lot of times I use this for sight casting black drum if they're like in big clouds, big schools, but it also works for redfish. You don't need anything else.
David,
Yes.
there's some connectivity issues. I don't know, Joel, if you're seeing that, or if maybe it's just me. Yeah, you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing that.
Okay.
Last thing I heard was redfish.
Hopefully it stays connected for the rest of it. I'm at
I'll
work,
turn my
so
camera off. Hopefully, maybe that'll help with connectivity.
okay. If it gets worse, I can go grab a hotspot out of my boss's office and see if it's just in that I really like this jig head option for dead shrimp. You can use that to sight cast, or if you can just use that to blind cast, and it's a good way, I think, for beginners to get into fishing with lures, but just a really clean approach. And kind of here's another example of it. And fishing for crab, using whole crab or half of a crab are good options for fishing for redfish, especially at the jetties. People have a lot of luck with crabs. They're a hardy bait and they don't get picked off by like pinfish and hardheads as much. Okay, moving on to lures. I know this can be kind of a daunting area for new fishermen, especially you walk into a tackle store and you see a million different lures on the shelves. And I kind of wanted to break it up into different sections. So going back to the water column, you have baits that work the upper section of the water column. You'll have baits that work kind of a more subsurface or spending, and then baits that work the bottom. And then to throw another layer into that, there's baits that are better as search baits and baits that are more of a finesse approach. And so the way to think about this is back when I was tournament fishing, I used to have a couple rods rigged up just because it takes time to tie on new lures and it's easier to just grab a new rod. But I always had like a topwater as my search bait. Um, but wake baits, weedless spoons, and popping corks are also like good options for this. But basically, these are baits that are going to cover a lot of water more quickly and let you know if there's fish in the area. And so with the top water, I was what we call casting and just casting uh, to the right, center, left, and just like everywhere in between, trying to pick apart that water uh, to see where those fish are going to be at, to kind of figure out what the pattern is. And if I didn't get any hits, then I would switch to something more subsurface, or if they're just swiping at it, then I would maybe go to like a subsurface twitch bait. And so learning the different actions of these baits and the section of the water column that they're working will help you put together an arsenal that kind of covers the whole water column. And then it's important to have some of these more finesse baits, just like if you can see that, like soft plastics for whenever you find the fish with your search bait, but it doesn't seem like they're really um, like attacking it or like committing to it, then that's when you go to like a soft plastic or a paddle tail or shrimp imitation and slow down a little bit and really pick the area apart. But my top redfish lures, I would say, would be a paddle tail, the tried and true gold spoon, any type of shrimp imitation like a DOA. I like the Marker 54 shrimps. Um, Z-Man makes some good ones. These are great options for sight casting. Top waters, like I mentioned, top waters are a little bit hard for redfish to eat just because their mouth is on the bottom, and so they will miss a lot of times. But this is where you can follow up with a soft plastic, and then pop and cork and a plastic, or a pop and cork and a Berkeley gulp shrimp is a great option. I think when I was first learning how to fish saltwater and fish in the flats, probably 90% of the time I had a pop and cork and a gulp shrimp or some type of gulp bait because it just had so much scent. And so if you're new and starting out, I would maybe give that a try and use about an 18-inch leader, depending on like how deep you're fishing. But yeah, pop and cork and uh, gulp shrimp or real shrimp is a good place to start. And then these shallow twitch baits, there's different brands of them, different styles, but these are also great options. And then what to look for when you're actually out on the water. I'll try to hurry so we have time to get to the Q&A, but you're going to be looking for bait and looking for birds like pelicans, especially in the wintertime. And then slicks. I know a lot of people associate slicks with trout, but redfish also put off slicks. And then when you're up shallow, you're looking for tails.
Can you quickly describe, or yeah, just define a slick?
Yeah, that's great. A slick is essentially, it's going to look like an oil sheen on the water, kind of a glossy um, area. And it's essentially when a fish is feeding on uh, a bait fish or shrimps or crabs or something, and the oils from that bait gets released, it goes to the surface and it starts to expand, kind of like if you've ever seen a drop of oil or gasoline on the surface, it expands. And so if you see the shiny area and it's really big, it usually drifted from a little ways. And so you don't want to fish exactly where you see that slick, but you kind of want to like go upwind a little bit. But if you see a slick and it's small, then you kind of know that that fish is pretty close by. But yeah, thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thanks for defining.
And then colors, I typically pick my color based off of the watercolor. So clear water, I'm going to be using more natural colored baits, or even like more clear colored baits. And then for green, I'll use a little bit darker like plums, or even like a white. And then muddy, I'll use dark like black, or pink, stuff that's going to contrast a little bit. And off colored water, I'll use kind of a contrast with a different colored tail. And then for tackle recommendations, maybe I'll leave this to the questions in the Q&A, because the gear you use is going to depend on what you plan on using it for, and if you're going to be making 1,000 casts in a day with it, or if you're just casting it from the beach and putting a rod holder. And so I can cover that a little bit more in the Q&A. And then going over the different type of rods, again, like spinning rod's going to be the most beginning friendly. Casting rods typically are a little bit more nuanced and take some practice. Surf rods, they have a little bit longer handle, and it's for more leverage for casting further. And so those are the difference I kind of wanted to highlight there. And then there's different actions of the rods. Typically for fishing the flats, I like a medium power, fast or extra fast rod. And it just, those typically have a little bit more sensitivity for fishing for lures. But if you're going to be fishing with bait, then you really need to like take in consideration the lure weight, and so kind of add up what weight you're going to be using, and then the weight of your bait, like live mullet or cut mullet, in order to like pick out a rod that's going to suit your needs. Some other gear recommendations. My polarized sunglasses are probably the most important thing I have with me. It helps me see the fish, helps you see the habitat. And I'd say a measuring board to know that you're keeping legal fish. A landing net will prevent you from a lot of heartbreak. And then a lip grip tool like these Boga grips in this picture will help you and the fish stay safe after you've landed your fish. And then maps. I use maps a lot. I use Google Maps, Google Earth a ton to find fish. But other maps like the hook and line map, I think they've gone out of business, but they make a pretty great product if you can find it. Trout Support, I think, also has maps. Salt Strong has an app with a lot of different mapping features. And then Angler U, I'm not sure if they have maps, but they have a lot of great resources for anglers in Texas. And to wrap it up, in the fall, get to the passes. The spring and the fall, focus on those bait migrations and immigrations. In the cool months, focus a little bit more on mud. Warm months, maybe target sand and grass a little bit more. And I like to say that redfish are introverts, and so get away from people. A lot of the places that I fish, I don't see anybody else, and I kind of love it because I'm also an introvert. But think big picture and then get granular, kind of follow the flow, the hydrology of the water, um, from the passes and through the channels into the more marsh, and onto the flats, and it'll help you find more fish. And then if you're gonna, just a few questions to kind of ask yourself while you're fishing when you get to the spot. What's the pattern for the area? What are they feeding on, and where in the water column are they? And lastly, yeah, the first step to catch more redfish is believing that you can. I visualize kind of like what my lure is doing and where the fish are at all times, and I think that helps me out a lot. But fishing with people that are better than you, this is probably like number one tip, and I think it's the reason why I increase my learning curve is by fishing with people that are better. You're already doing the third thing by being here, but I think researching, watching videos and stuff helps your brain have more pattern recognition, and it'll know what to look for once you get out there, kind of subconsciously. I'll skip to just like 80% of the fish are in 20% of the water. You really need to know how to cut out water and find the productive water. And lastly, keep a log of your experiences. These fish do kind of hold the same patterns year over year, and having a log makes it a little bit easier the next year. And with that, I think it's time for Q&A. Sorry for going over a little bit.
Oh, you're good. We still have like 10 minutes. If you wanted to unshare or stop sharing screen, that way might help with the connectivity. Thank you so much for that. It really helped. I really like I liked your advice. And yeah, I agree. I think I always say, like, you can't ever know the mind of a fish, but you can try.
Yeah.
So I always try to, like, think, what is the redfish doing right now? And so, but yeah, okay, just to get into some of the questions that were asked in the chat, I wanted to just kind of just quickly address, I know we had a lot of interest in the freshwater fishing tactics, and I can let David summarize his answer to that. And then the other thing was the fly fishing tactics. I'm happy. I brought some of my stuff and I can help with that. But yeah, if you could I really liked the way that you responded to this question for the freshwater one.
So they're asking about freshwater redfish tips.
Yeah, like the stocked fish. When you submitted your responses, I liked what you mentioned. If I have it pulled up, if you want me to just read it.
I can give a shot.
Sure.
Yeah, for the freshwater redfish, they act a little bit differently than coastal redfish in the fact that they're a little bit more of a deep water fish. And so people have luck using like deeper crankbaits or fishing deeper coves. But my suggestion is to, if you have sonar and if you're fishing out of a boat, to look for the bait fish schools that are in some of these deeper areas, kind of idle around, troll around, and look for where the bait's hanging out, especially like deeper edges of the lake. And if you're fishing from the bank, try to find some of these deeper coves. But trying to think of the different, cut tilapia, shrimp also works. But yeah, just keep that in mind that they're not necessarily going to be up shallow like these coastal fish.
I would just add to that that tilapia is the main food source for both Victor Bronig and Calaveras. Tilapia is what those fish are eating naturally. Those lakes are full of tilapia, so I agree that tilapia is probably a good idea for live bait or dead bait.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if um, if there's any way that you can tell your fish before you stock them what to eat. But okay, I think then the other, I had some let me actually look through the chat questions. Yeah, okay, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Well, yeah, if y'all see any questions that you're like, oh, I really want to answer this, this one from Ted was a curious question about the increase in dolphins and sharks.
We've had that input from a lot of our anglers about the number of sharks, not so much dolphins, but in particular the number of sharks. And a lot of our anglers are noticing that there's more sharks in the water now. I just off the bat, I'll say that increased number of top predators is a sign of a very healthy ecosystem. Whether or not the sharks have had an impact on the redfish, I'm certain that they're eating the redfish, but it's hard for us to know the exact impact of a top predator on a species like a redfish. We can look at the trends and see that we've been pretty consistent through the years. There may have been a little bit of a downward trend over the last 5 or 10 years, but to chalk that up to sharks is just impossible for us to do.
I'm curious to know if that is more, if you've seen more of the sharks up in your area, like the Palacios area, versus what it looks like on the lower end of the coastline.
I think we're getting that feedback all up and down the coast, and I'm in one of the sharkier bays. We're definitely getting that feedback here in Matagorda Bay and East Matagorda Bay, but I think that's feedback we're getting from anglers all over the coast here in Texas.
Yeah, I'll say the Upper Laguna doesn't necessarily have as many sharks in the bay. I think it's a little bit too salty. I know there are some juveniles that do come into the bays, but we definitely don't have as many as the upper coast and even some areas of like the lower Laguna.
Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to, yeah, if y'all see any questions, definitely pop in and answer those. I was curious about so fishing strategies. There were a lot of, I think the audience might be, more new to fishing or might be looking for different ways to fish. And so a really, in my personal experience, I think an approachable fishing tactic would be like wading. And that I was curious to know, or if you could you let us know about the different sediment types and how that impacts like someone's ability to wade and like maybe better areas to wade because of that.
That's a great question because wading through mud is really hard. And so knowing what areas are safe to wade is really important. And that's another thing. You can probably reach out to people in fishing forums or groups on Facebook and just see like if a certain area is okay to wade. I know we're creating a fishing map for Aransas Bay that'll use some of that habitat information, and so you could use that to kind of guide which areas are better to wade. I know the hook and line maps, they would have um, polygons on those maps, areas where it would say this is better for wade fishing because it's like hard sand and grass. And so I would definitely encourage people to like ask other anglers if this area is safe to wade, and maybe not go alone if you're trying an area for the first time, especially if you're doing it with waders on in the wintertime. That can be dangerous. So that's a great question.
Yeah, I ask because I've definitely been stuck in the mud while waiting, and it's not fun. Um, I wanted to quickly address just kind of, I'm gonna, if it's okay, just summarize an answer to the fly fishing for red drum. I will say I'll recommend that, take all of the information that we talked about tonight, and you could still apply that to fly fishing. Of course, you won't have the option for bait, but you can use patterns that imitate certain types of bait. And then as for like equipment, anything 8 weight and up, but I always just say like, go out and try whatever you want. But really, if you want to have a good time and be a little bit more successful, maybe 8 weight plus. And then as for types of line, really depends on the type of water that you're fishing. Most Texas like coastal flats, they recommend like a weight forward tropical or warm water fly line. And then if you plan to surf fish, sinking or full intermediate fly line. And then as for flies, fly patterns, same thing. I recommend just kind of getting that the bait and lures and all of the information that we talked about tonight, and kind of thinking about what patterns could still be successful. And then wanted to add just a couple more things, just one more thing about equipment. David, you had mentioned travel hooks, and I really wanted to say, like, at those stocked ponds where you can fish for those, where for if you bring an educational group to those ponds and you can fish for those bull reds, they don't allow any treble hooks. It's just a C hook, and I don't think it's even allowed to have a barb on it. So, and you can still land them. So I will say, like, even if you are fishing to take a fish home, still kind of trying your best to avoid any of those treble hooks, just to reduce that damage, and you can still have success in taking a fish home. But I'll let David and Joel, if y'all wanted to, I know we're already at 8, but if you had any things to add from the chat.
I do have one thing. Somebody asked this question. It's a pretty good question about after the webinar is over, if they have additional questions, is there like a social or something that that they can send questions after the fact? Like,
That's
do
a
they
good.
send that to your social media or an email or?
Yeah, you can send it to our email, and I can put that. I can reply to all and put that in there. Also, when we do our follow-up email, and also throughout the registration of this, my email should have been on there. So yeah, just I guess take a look at the emails that we've sent, the communication that we sent out, and then I will add that Angler Ed email in here.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can share my contact info on that too.
Awesome.
This was a cool event. It was cool to see so many people in here. A lot of really great questions. I've really enjoyed it. I learned a lot from Natalia and David this evening. So I think I probably had as much fun as anybody did in this webinar.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Joel.
all for showing up.
Yeah, I really appreciate y'all's time to share your expertise on this species, and I think it really, yeah, it helps us better understand the resource, and it helps us stay a little bit more connected to the fish and really bring that like wholesome picture of conservation, and having a conservation mind when it comes to fishing for red drum, and knowing that like you know, there's people at the MDC carrying buckets manually to the truck, and thinking about all of those moments of connection between, you know, the hatchery and me landing, you know, a redfish on the flats, and like it just it's just a great wholesome picture.
And I don't know if this is going to be in the survey that you send out, but I think in the future, if we have any more events like this, we can maybe dive into more specific areas, like areas of the coast or different styles of fishing, and get more into the nitty-gritty.
I like that someone asked David, just give us one honey hole.
I like that one too.
9
Hey, you
mile
just
hole.
got to get out there. Well, yeah, one last question that I guess I just wanted to end on was any advice that y'all have to anglers or novice anglers in general?
Advice to novice anglers, I would say, like, definitely find some people that you get along with that maybe have a little more experience, and do whatever you can to go fishing with them. Buy them tacos, pay for gas. But that's going to be the best way that you're going to learn faster. But also just like getting out on the water as much as you can. The time on the water is invaluable. And so just take every opportunity you can to go fishing.
My advice, I'm a bit of a novice angler myself, so my advice would be we have so much shoreline and piers and state parks that have access to fishing. So if you don't have a boat and you don't have all the gear, a lot of the state parks have fishing gear that they can loan out, and they have advice. And my advice would be to go find a pier on the coast and look around and see what everyone else is doing. Because a lot of times when you go to a pier, a lighted pier at night, for instance, and people are fishing, they do that a lot, and you can learn a lot from the folks around you that are doing that. So that'd probably be my biggest piece of advice. Get started from the shore and kind of take a look at what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I think those night fishing piers and those moments, really great opportunity for connection with the people either in your community or just, yeah, meeting other people. It's
Yep.
definitely those moments of like disconnect from our screens maybe. But okay, well, I'm not gonna hold y'all hostage any longer. I will send that follow-up email. If not tomorrow, you might see it in your email next week, and that will have the resources that we shared and place where you can find the recording. And then David graciously shared his contact information, so I will add that as well. And then, yeah, if you have any further questions or curiosities, definitely don't hesitate to reach out or check out our website. And we have a lot of really great resources. Same thing with our YouTube page. So, yeah, thank y'all again, and hope to see you out on the water.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Hi guys.